content is usually personal development and time management. I speak mostly to moms who are interested in sort of finding themselves again. Once you become a mom, you kind of like everything goes on the kid, right? And as much as that's fulfilling, there comes a point where you lose your own self. And so I was there, and I help other women who find themselves in that position try to really reconnect with themselves. And I found some really cool and effective ways to do that, that don't take a lot of time, energy, or money. So I spend a lot of time talking about that on my podcast. It's called Grow Like a Mother, and Grow Like a Mother is my handle on social media. I'm on Instagram and Facebook over there if you care to join. I did try TikTok, but honestly, like, I know I am a millennial, but not really. I just can't hack the TikTok thing. So I tried, but it's too much.
I've been trying to get into TikTok because that's where all the young cats are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, totally.
And you don't want to like show your age, even though we're both quite young still.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
But tell us, or at least tell me and my audience, how did you get started in doing the work that you're doing?
So I kind of had what a lot of people will refer to as like a dark night of the soul, right? So after I had my second baby, I decided that I didn't want to go back to my corporate job, and I took an opportunity to open up a retail consignment store in the town I was living in, rather than going back to the hospitality world, which has odd hours and it was a long commute. I thought, you know what, I'll just stay close to the family, and I'm going to open up this consignment store. It felt really great. And then the recession hit, and or not the recession. Well, it was, I guess, but the pandemic. So it was 2020, and I was supposed to have kids going into daycare, and the daycare's closed. And I was on the hook for this retail space in a storefront that couldn't open because the governments didn't really know what the pandemic was all about. And could we open? Could we not? You remember like watching the TV every day at 11 for the prime minister to make his announcement, like what's open and what's not, right? Um, and I was having really bad postpartum anxiety and depression through all of it as well, without really knowing it at the time. Also, that was just a few months before my eldest child was diagnosed with autism. There's a lot going on. And so it all kind of came to a head one day, when I thought the kids were going to be able to go back to daycare, and I thought I'd be able to open the store, and like the dream would continue and I could get started. And that wasn't to be. There was more shutdowns and delays and all of that. And I sort of realized that I needed to take control of my mindset, because the external circumstances that were coming at me weren't something I could control. And I really needed to I felt very out of control. And so that was the beginning of my personal growth journey. I dove into self-help, personal growth, personal development, whatever you want to call it. There's so many labels for this world of, I just call learning. And I found that as I was doing this, much of the work was almost unattainable for the position I was in life. I didn't have all of the resources and time and money required to accomplish some of these things. Like, for example, a morning routine is something that is heavily talked about, right? In the personal development world. Get up, do your workout, do your gratitude, have some green juice, whatever. Get up an hour before you usually do. But like my babies were waking up at like 5:30 in the morning. And I'm like, there's no way I'm getting up at 4:30 to do these things. First of all, one of them is going to hear me, right? And then that'll be that. But also it's just way too early. I just can't, right? So I got really good at finding ways to tweak the traditional personal development advice and make it work for me as a working parent. So from there, the retail store didn't actually work out. Surprise, surprise, timing was real bad. But I developed this passion for just sharing my knowledge with other moms. And that's where the podcast started. And it's kind of just grown from there.
I know for me, during the closures of our country, it was very difficult to identify what I was going to bring into this quote unquote new norm. And that was like the term that everyone was using, right?
Yep.
And I wish I had a little bit more guidance because probably like you during that time, like me and like so many others, we were kind of building it as we fly it, so to
Yeah.
speak, right? And I remember those meetings CP24 news, for those who don't know, it was
Yeah.
always popping up. It was like, okay, they're going to open up. We are free. And it was like, 2 more weeks, guys. 2 more weeks come by. They would walk over and they're like, okay, we're free this time. They can't pull the same joke on us twice. And then it was 2 weeks more. And then 2 weeks turned into 2 years.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, they probably were struggling trying to understand, okay, how am I going to go back to my normal life, or at least a version of that normality? I could sympathize with the parents out there, because if you had children who you had maybe just before or during and you're trying to find them daycare, that must have been a very difficult situation, because you don't know how you're going to take care of yourself. You don't know how you're going to take care of your children. So, Jill, what was some of the commonalities that you're finding during the struggles of these mothers who are trying to figure out life when everything was just falling apart all around them?
Yeah, it was really hard because there was no constant to be able to hold on to for any of us, right? We didn't even have as a resource loved ones and parents and grandparents, because we were told we had to have this bubble of like 10 people, right? And so you're like, well, who's allowed to watch my kids and who's not? And do I really have to be the one to be there all the time? When does that leave space for myself? And it's so funny because we all individually had different struggles. I have friends who lived alone during that time, and they would have loved to connect with someone, whereas I was connected to someone all day long, every day, and would have loved some time to be by myself, right? So just first off, acknowledging like it was hard for everyone. But if you were someone who was in the thick of it with small kids and trying to work on yourself or work on something, it felt really impossible. And I think some of the main challenges that I saw was lack of understanding on how to take time for yourself and really have some self-care in the mix, right? That was still as a budding kind of term, self-care, but we're like, well, when, right? And along that same line is like managing your time. When you're at home, time kind of it warps, right? You don't get to go out into the world. The days kind of flow into one another. You're not sure what time it is, what day it is. You haven't showered, like you're in the same clothes as you slept in it. We all did that, and it lost meaning, time. And so I feel like a lot of people forgot how to strategically plan their day around their values. Um, and time just kind of took over them rather than them having ownership of their time. And that can be super destructive.
I know for you and I, we look like we're about the same age, right? We're still young, vibrant, and good looking people.
Totally.
And totally, right? And our childhood, we're probably, if you remember, we're probably running around and having all this fun. And then you see some of these kids, they're just locked away in their homes, as you mentioned, unable to know their friends, maybe in the way they want to know it. I know here in Canada, we had the remote teaching, which for many people was like a disaster, and kids weren't even showing up. And I remember hearing stories that the teachers were AWOL from their own classes and all this stuff too. So what was some of the struggles for the children who maybe knew how life was before this, and they're trying to figure out, Jill, I can't see John, I can't see Jane, I'm stuck with you all day long? Like, how were they trying to figure their lives out at such a young and impressionable age?
Well, I can speak from my experience with like really small ones. They were living their best life. Like they had mom and excuse me, mom and dad home all the time. They were like, this is great. I don't need anyone else. I've got someone here taking care of me, being my playmate. I've got everything I need. They're not going anywhere. But then when the pandemic is over and they're allowed to go back into their schools and they're allowed to see their friends and play at the parks, there's this level of hesitation that I think stole a lot of that spark from childhood for a lot of kids, especially the ones who got caught. I can only imagine the age group, like if you were maybe like in kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, and then the pandemic hits, like that right there is this huge change, right? And then you go back to your normal. But for the kids who were small like mine, the change really came after the pandemic because all they knew was pandemic. So the challenge laid in getting them reaccustomed to socializing in schools, to sitting still in the classrooms, right? To sharing and playing with other kids their age. And just in general, I saw with my friend group a lot of almost like stranger danger with their kids not being receptive to meeting new adults, even family members that they had maybe only been able to video with, right? So just some really interesting things that you wouldn't have necessarily expected from that period.
One of my friends, she became an absolute shut-in. She stayed home, she isolated, and she got so used to life within, as you mentioned, her bubble, but her bubble is so small, it even excluded to a degree the people, her family that she actually lived with.
Wow.
And she would tell me, like, she laughs about it now. She'll tell me stories how she'll stand at the door. Did you wash your hands? Don't touch anything. Do anything like that. There's another person that he would actually get the hose and he would wash down his groceries
Oh, wow.
before he put. Yeah, he was so hardcore with it. And one day I went to him, I was like, do you put the groceries wet in the cupboards? And he kind of looked like that. I was like, aha, you haven't thought it all the way through. But it drove us to do some interesting and what some people probably think some crazy things. And when you mentioned the children, I think as a parent, as adults, we focus so much time on them. But then we started to see how it started to impact the older generation, the Gen Zs, the boomers, because these are people who spent many of their lives outdoors so often from their job, the trades, wherever. And unfortunately, I was told a story by someone who I live in the neighborhood with, and he said that he had his two uncles. They self-deleted because they couldn't handle life back out there again after so many years being alone, being by themselves, and just, as you mentioned, the stranger danger, right? Keep your 5 feet. I don't want to really interact. So as we look to maybe put that behind us, what are some ways that maybe worked for you or that you believe can work for people to make sure that they're reintegrating even a year or so afterwards back into a normal social life?
That's a great question. I think for me, much of the socializing and like being in the world again came from being comfortable with myself. I teach all the time that before we go and do anything, we need to center and ground within ourselves first. We need to make sure we're aligned with our values. We need to make sure that we're trusting our intuition and listening, right, to that inner voice that we can trust, because I think there's so much mistrust, even the fake news. And like, this world's crazy. If you really think about it, like, we're in a wild time. And so there's nobody knows who they can believe. Nobody knows who they can trust. And we forget that we can trust ourselves, right? And the more authentic you are in your own skin, you start to recognize that authentic spirit within other people that you're encountering. And then that trust is there because you're like, oh, okay, that's you and me. We're different, but we're both authentically ourselves, and we're showing up in our truest expression, right? Of who we are. We're not wondering like, oh, is that person thinking something different than they're saying, right? Are they lying to me? Is there something I'm missing? Especially with social media, right? The comparison, we're only seeing the highlight reels of people's lives. We have this, I think, misrepresentation of reality. And so the more that you can, within your own self and your own home, create that groundedness, the more confident you're going to be going into the world in any situation, because you'll have that basis of truth to be working from. So that's for sure the first thing that I would say. Oh, God. In terms of other things, I think just really having compassion and grace for everyone's different situations is a big way that you can ease social interaction, from my experience anyways. I'm a Gemini in astrology, so like I always see two parts of everything. So it's kind of my superpower in that way, as difficult as it can be. But if you're able to empathize that we've all gone through a really hard time recently. We're all trying to figure it out again. And things might look different for someone than they did before the pandemic, because perhaps like me, they went through this like big, I don't know, awakening and learning and transformation. Marriages have broken up, babies have been born, careers have been changed, businesses have been folded and started. Like life is different for everyone. So even within people, their situation could be different. They could be a whole new person now, right? And just keeping in mind that we've all gone through this really sort of traumatic life experience together, but individually, and giving grace to everyone for just figuring out where they fit again. Yeah.
For those who are watching on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and my social media website, please stay tuned for more incredible interviews like the one we have with Jill, and we will be back for more. So stay tuned, everyone.